Hey, I'm Paul from VRP Rocks, and today I'm joined by a founder, a CEO, an executive producer, in fact, the big boss man from Drum Talk TV himself, Mr. Dan Shinder.
Hello. Thank you, Paul. Thank you so much for having me.
It's
Really
a pleasure to
appreciate it.
speak with you and a legend when it comes to the world of Drum Talk TV. Now, if we're speaking about drummers, then you are obviously the best person to speak to when it comes to this. So we've got you on because we do my five favorites, a topic that I love doing. I love speaking with people and finding out their five favorites because it's personal. It's not a list that people kind
Yeah.
of feel like they have to come up with a technical list or it should be this, that, or the other. This is personal to you, to other people that have been on, and that's why I love it so much. So, Dan, with such experience with drumming and a history and a back catalogue, it was great to see your list, your number five. So we're going to start on number five, and that is a man
Okay.
called Carl Palmer. So why is Carl making your top five list?
So this list, first of all, was really difficult for me. After number one, it was like, oh, there's all these people. And maybe I can have a little moment after we're done with the first five for some honorable mentions. But
Of course. Yep.
Carl Palmer intrigued me. I started playing drums really young. I wasn't even 7 years old. I got really good, really early, thankfully to a really good ear and a great memory. And I was able to learn really complex music very early on, like Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Mhm.
And when I was nine, I guess, or 10, when Brain Salad Surgery came out, I think I was 10. You got Carnival 9, first, second, third impression. You got Hoedown, Jerusalem. It's just a masterful album. And the drumming, first of all, I always was also attracted to symphonic music and the grandeur of it all. And here you had three men making that kind of music, but with rock instruments. And the drumming was just so colorful and active, even the subtleties, and it had every element of dynamics and the speed that man had. And he was one of the drummers, maybe the first I ever heard, who was a rock drummer who you didn't really hear as much. I shouldn't say as much. You heard a lot more than just his early jazz influence. Because remember, all the guys on my list and some honorable mentions, the gentlemen and women that came up in the 60s and early 70s, they didn't have rock influences. It didn't exist. So their forefathers were like John DeJohnette, Buddy Rich, Louis Bellson, all those people.
Yeah, all that
But
sort of stuff.
Carl brought with him the classical and symphonic influence, and that really intrigued me. And my favorite percussion instrument happens to be the timpani drums. And when I heard the timpani drums mixed in with ELP's music, so there was that whole beyond the full package of music and drumming. And I can't imagine any other drummer having fit in with that lineup. Now, Cozy Powell did a great job with what he did with Greg Lake and Keith Emerson with the album they made. And he did all those other songs live. And I saw that tour his way, but no one could have been Emerson, Lake, and someone else. And I just think that's a huge statement because he's really only been in two enormous bands in his life. Yes, there was Atomic Rooster. Now there's Carl Palmer ELP Experience, but really there was ELP and Asia. And then the interesting thing about Asia was, in a lot of ways, we got a different drummer. In a way, all those guys, there was this super group of these prog rock drummers in the first song. I'm like, did I actually put on an Engelbert Humperdinck album? What's going on here with Heat of the Moment? So I love that he was able to be so versatile and have a whole other career with that band. A little bit of a tangent there, but I hope that answers the question as to why Carl was and still is one of my top, not just favorites, but each of these five are huge influences on me personally as a drummer. When I was 15, I was in a band. Well, the bass player was older. Two other guys, 5 and 6 years older than. We played all of Carnival 9. We played all that crazy stuff. And I was 15. So it's one thing to hear it, understand it, and remember it. The dexterity of teaching yourself, that's a whole other thing. By the time I was 15, I'd been playing 9 years. So I had sort of a head start. And honestly, I think there's some luck involved, but you know what they say about luck? It's all about being prepared. And again, I was born with a great ear, great memory for music. Sometimes I forget to change one of the cat boxes or something, but for music, I got a great memory.
Fascinating stuff. In terms of VLP, then, because they were huge at the time. I mean, they're often overlooked now when people think of prog bands. Obviously, Pink Floyd, yes, Genesis, these sorts of names come up, but ELP very rarely these days gets a mention. So, if
Yeah.
asking you as a drum aficionado, if I had never heard ELP before, what would you recommend I listen to really get a feel of Carl's style?
The longest title in the history of albums, and that is Welcome Back, My Friends, to the Show That Never Ends, Ladies and Gentlemen, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. That's the name of their triple live album. It was the tour for Brain Salad Surgery. So you get this spattering of some other stuff they'd done before. But if it were just down to studio albums, I'd say Trilogy and Brain Salad Surgery, and you'll know what they're all about.
Absolutely fantastic choice for your number five. Then let's move on to number four. And this one again, when you mentioned jazz influences and they've all come through that, this guy certainly did have that originally, but he's now one of the founding fathers of the hard rock, the heavy metal kind of era, isn't he? We're talking about the great Ian Pace.
Yeah, that man can swing a freight train, as Carmine Appice, one of his best friends, describes him. You hear so much jazz in his music. And in fact, in 1999, I did a CD called Danny Shinder. I was known as Danny back then. Danny Shinder and Friends Retrofits. And I took 5 classic rock songs and did them in big band style with no electronic instruments. And the song I chose for Deep Purple was Lazy. And I had a gentleman who arranged all the horn parts at the time for The Tonight Show with Jay Leno. And he worked with me to do the horn arrangements and also played the saxophones and recruited the trumpet player and trombone player. My point is, when we did Lazy in big band style, there was virtually nothing to change. It was the same song. So Ian is really the bridge between those two genres more than any other drummer I've heard. Mitch Mitchell definitely touches on that. Bill Ward of Black Sabbath definitely touches on that. But Ian Pace, Deep Purple's sound is built, I think, on the foundation of his jazz influences. And not to slight any of the other members who also brought that, but Ian Pace, again, such a technician, but there's some drummers that are great technicians but don't have a lot of feel, and that translates in a lot of ways, not just on drum set, Paul. When we look at drum corps, you have to be a technician to play, whether it's snare drum or the quintuplets or even bass drum, whatever. But I have heard drum corps groove and swing. So one doesn't necessarily come with the other. One doesn't necessarily also isolate the other. And again, that's what makes Ian Pace such a package. He's got the jazz influence, the technicality, but such a deep freaking groove and swing. It's just amazing. And you can listen throughout their whole catalog and pick that out. It's not like, oh yeah, on these 4 albums, that's when he really, it's throughout anything they've ever done.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in terms of longevity, there's not many drummers that stick with a band for so long. I mean, we're talking over 50 years and he's still with Deep Purple. And
Yeah,
that's incredible, isn't it?
yeah, it really is. And Carl and Ian, who we've talked about so far, 2 of the nicest guys you could ever talk to, really. And a lot of times I think the larger in life an artist gets, the more they might be perceived as they don't want to be bothered, or they're going to be off-putting, or
Yeah.
they're stuck up or pompous or something like that. And I haven't run into that in the 11 years and 8 months of Drum Talk TV.
That's fascinating stuff. And again, in terms of Ian and his style with Deep Purple, name me one of the standout tracks for you, which
Oh,
makes you think, oh my word, this guy is incredible. Which Deep Purple track makes you listen to him and think that guy has got it?
gosh, just so many. It's like, which grain of sand on this beach do I want to take home with me? I'm going to say Pictures of Home. Pictures of Home from Machine Head. And of course, there's Highway Star, there's Lazy, there's Fireball, there's Some Kind of Woman, My Woman for Togo, there's Strange Kind of Woman. I mean, there's so many, but put on pictures of home, and it starts out with a drum solo that will just spin your head, and it's only like 3 measures, 4 measures. It's amazing. Yeah.
Fantastic stuff. Brilliant choice, Ian. Pace joins Carl Palmer. Let's move on to number three. And again, we're going kind of back into the prog rock era. And we're talking about Genesis and Phil Collins. So why does Phil get a mention in your top five?
So Phil is really an enigma and an anomaly in a lot of ways, because when Steve Hackett left Genesis and the band started to lean towards getting more commercial, then he came out with his first solo album that spoke to his roots, which was old soul and R&B. It brought on a whole other audience, and I can't believe the amount of people, Paul, that don't know Phil plays drums or plays beyond the boom 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 boom. If you listen to the very first Genesis live album from 1972 or three, I believe, three, the drumming on there is insane. It's insane. But even much more fast forward, if you listen to their reunion show live over Europe, or When in Rome, one was the DVD, one was the CD set, even that far in 2004, I believe it was, 4, something like that. His drumming was still amazing. A killer prog rock drumming, but I'm going to tell you something. Some of my favorite drumming, where I think he was so tasteful, was on Robert Plant's first 2 solo albums. If you listen to Pledge Pin, Burning Down One Side, In the Mood, his sound is so signature and his drumming is so good. And I saw him with Robert on his first tour, which he didn't do till after his second album came out. And I saw Genesis, I don't know how many times, 8, 10. Just such a great songwriter, lyricist, singer, arranger, producer. Oh, and he's an amazing, phenomenal drummer. He's a huge part of where my sound comes from. And I love playing to any live Genesis, and any Robert Plant that he played to is just so much fun to play.
Absolutely, he's an all-round guy, isn't he? And you mentioned that obviously he was singing. So when he's on stage and he's singing and he's playing the drums as well, I mean, how does he manage to balance that? Because that's not an easy act, is it?
It's not. And he doesn't do it throughout a whole concert, but for any drummer to even do it background from time to time is still, your brain is focused on one thing while your brain is also focused on all these other things. But then there's the breathing. Let's face it, drumming's the most athletic. Okay, running around with your flute, saxophone, and guitar doesn't count. But drumming's the most athletic instrument. So if you're playing something that's very high, beats per minute, and there's a lot of velocity to go on, your body's doing this, and you're singing, you got to control your breath for singing. But I've always found that fascinating. And I used to sing background years and years and years ago in a band, but I never sung lead. I mean, that's just crazy. And I've seen him do that or trade off vocals back in the old days with Peter Gabriel, when Gabriel was still in the band. It really is a feat of magic. I just kind of feel bad sometimes, because apparently when he bought his first drum set, it came out of the package backwards, because he plays. Oh no, he's left-handed. That's right.
And in terms of obviously moving into the 80s, then obviously the styles changed, and we talked about that. He went very much more commercial. And you said that there's some people that don't even realize he was a drummer beyond the bit that you mentioned.
Yeah.
How do you see that in terms of the influence? Because obviously people knew him from Genesis, the early days, and then moving into the pop stuff. How do you feel that he is remembered today, and the influence today? Has it been tarnished slightly by the 80s feel and the 80s era?
This is a great question, because I think, everything is subjective. There's no best, there's no better. It's who you like best or what you think is better. That goes with music, any other kind of art, pizza, TV shows, movies, whatever. So I think the answer, and I'll give a less vague answer in a moment, but I think in general, the answer really depends on who you ask. So if you ask someone who's into the real hardcore, Genesis isn't Genesis without Peter Gabriel, or without, after Steve Hackett, they're going to be more into the math music and the more progressive and epic stuff and fantasy storytelling and all of that. And they won't give any of the other stuff like Behind the Lines and Misunderstanding and those songs, Turn It On, any credence whatsoever. But if you listen to people who that's when they latched on to Genesis because, Turn It On Again, Misunderstanding, those songs ended up on more popular radio, if you will, and then they go back and listen to The Knife, or not The Knife, that's a ELP song. But let's go with Watcher of the Skies or Return of the Giant Hogweed or Supper's Ready. They're going to be like, what acid were they on during, and they won't be able to relate to it. And then those people in the middle, maybe fast forward, That's All, Mama, maybe that's way too commercial for them. So if you ask the people at the end of that top commercial poppy spectrum, they might not like any of that other stuff. So it really, I think, depends on who you ask. In general, I think there are going to always be people who think he's sold out. There are going to be people who think the band sold out. But Phil returned to his favorite music. He didn't listen to prog when he joined Genesis. That was like, what the fuck is this going on? And he adapted and he had the chops for it and it worked out. When he went solo, he said, I'm going to do the kind of music. That's why he covered You Won't Pay Me La, because that was his thing. So if I highly recommend, and I have it here somewhere, his autobiography, and I'm a big audiobooks guy. I get the hardcover, but him telling his life story and walking through people exactly what you just asked about, you got to hear it from the man himself. It's the most amazing. Him and Geddy Lee's autobiography and Bill Bruford are just amazing. I highly recommend. So I think, Paul, it really depends on who you ask and what their perspective is, just like cheese. Someone that likes really hard cheese is not going to like brie. If someone really likes the hard
Pinky blue
mozzarella,
stuff.
they're not going to. Yeah, it's the same thing, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, it is fascinating because I spoke with Leland, who's a good friend of Phil's, recently,
Yeah.
and he was saying how much the press really got to him in the 80s as well. So that was kind of one of the reasons I wanted to bring that up. But just in terms of Talk TV, we mentioned at the start that there was some exciting things happening. So it seems like a good point before we reveal number 2 and number 1 on your list. Tell us a bit more about this, because I've got a little line here from your communications director who says that you're launching an experiential interactive membership site in a 3D metaverse with gamification. Now, that sounds like a lot of words I don't understand, so please explain that to me a little bit easier if you can.
I know, like, how did a drummer even come up with all that? I'm not an astrophysicist. So what it is our membership site that we've been working on for a long time has 4 main things. It has exclusive live stream concerts, and this isn't where we go to a concert with cameras and live stream it. These are concerts put on by the artist just for our membership in a more intimate environment. It might be in the band's studio. It might be in their living room.
Wow.
It might be before or after sound check at a venue, and it's just a few songs and some conversation just for our audience. And we project that on a screen in a 3D metaverse. You saw a little bit of that in that video that I showed you. And then we do the same style of broadcasting within our membership site for fan Q&As. So it's not me interviewing the artist, but we will have a guest who is either an artist, a producer, or a record executive who the fans can ask the questions. And we put the fan up on the big screen, just like you and I are side by side. Okay, Paul, it's your turn to ask Ian Pace a question. We put you up on the screen with Ian. You ask the question, Ian answers, and we keep you on the screen until the question's been answered. Meanwhile, someone's being messaged, okay, you're next. Questions are vetted. And we have like several different 3D environments, and people can scoot around in those 3Ds, watch from different vantage points on a mobile phone, on a laptop, on a tablet, or a PC. You don't need special headwear, as my wife said in that video. And you can also create your own avatar. You can sit next to someone across the world who you're friends with and watch the concert. Or if you just want to go old school, you can click a button and just watch it 2D, let it fill your screen. So with the concerts and the fan Q&As, we do that. We also have 4 game shows that are live streamed within our membership site, 4 game shows that are mostly music trivia, and it's none of this is just for drummers. We've got guitar players, keyboard players, and are going to do fan Q&As. We've got topics on the game shows that are one is called Who the Fark Is This? And we show a picture of a kid and then four big artists that play different instruments. You got to figure out who is that kid? Is it Alice Cooper? Is it Ian Pace? Is it Neil Peart? It's a lot of fun, and people can win prizes. The quicker you answer the right answer, the more points you get. There's another one called Majority Rules, where you got to guess what other people would guess and be in the majority. And then there's some trivia stuff. Lots of fun, lots of fun. Those are the three big things. The fourth is going to really excite drummers. Online, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, you cannot post videos on a fan page of you playing to like an actual CD, an actual product, the original release by the artist. It gets muted, it gets snagged. Sometimes it could take up to a few months or something. In our private environment, there's no algorithms for that. So we have what's called the Brilliance Showcase. Share your brilliance and admire the brilliance of others, where people can now send us videos of them playing to the actual version of Smoke on the Water, or something by Billy Cobham and Mahavishnu Orchestra, Go Ahead, Break Your Leg, or ELP or whatever. You know, they could play to the actual versions, and it's because it's a private environment and not for public distribution, we're able to do that. Those are the four big things. The Drum Talk TV, our first 10 years documentary, comes out next week as we're recording this. That's going to be in there. And 10 years of our first 100 viral videos that got millions of views. A lot of those things are from fans who we curated their content that sent them in, and they just took off. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews from over the years. So lots of fun stuff. And it's really so that everything's now in one place. And then there's all these new experiences. That's the experiential part in the 3D environment, and interactive, because it's not just one way. People are actually part of the experience. So that's I know, a mouthful, but that's it. And people, if you sign up by September 30th, had to get my date right. And that's Buddy Rich's birthday, by the way. It's only $7 a month US, or $77 a year. And $7 a month, I mean, in the US, well, the economy here sucks big time, but a box of cereal, Fruit Loops, Lucky Charms, Frosted Flakes costs more than $7. A combo meal at your popular hamburger fast food place, Jack in the Box, McDonald's, whatever, $12. So for $7 a month US, you can get this. And yes, we welcome foreigners. We'll take any kind of currency. And yeah, we have followers from all over the world, over 100 countries. So people are jumping in. It's becoming more and more fun, with more and more members being interactive. And I appreciate you asking about that. It's been 4 years in the making, and the last year and the last 4 months have literally been brain bending. Just and I got to thank my team. Yeah, without my team, I have the most awesome team. We're a tight-knit team of 8 people that are the core team of Drum Talk TV. Myself, my wife Enja, my son Stephen, the youngest of our 11 kids. He's 8, but he does a great job. No, he's going to be 30 soon. Steve. And then we've got Jeff, our president. We've got Danielle, our chief technical officer and chief marketing officer. We've got Ariana Stella, who is our sales manager for our advertising programs and everything like that. And then we got my amazing executive assistant, McKenna, and her amazing wife, Megan, who works with Steve in the content department. My son, Steve, is our chief content officer and produces all of our live broadcasts, whether in the membership site or interviews or covering events and things like that. So it's 8 people, and we are pushing this boulder up the hill every day.
Right, let's move on to choice number 2 then. This is number 2 on your list, and it doesn't surprise me because I know that you also help out on Yes Shift, a podcast. I've seen you do that. So number 2 is Alan White.
Alan White, there he is, if I may. This is Alan when he was 42 in 1990. That's me, believe it or not, with a little bit of hair and some old lady glasses. And the little baby there is my other son, Alex. He's grown. He's now 5'9", 260. And Alan, I've been a Yes fan since 1971 when my older cousin introduced me to Fragile. That, of course, had Bill Bruford, as did Close to the Edge. And I bought Close to the Edge and Yes songs at the same time and discovered that's how I discovered Alan White. Like, I didn't know he was on Imagine and George Harrison's album, tons of stuff, Joe Cocker. And I just immediately gravitated towards Alan's playing. The first album he ever did with them, a studio album, was Tales from Topographic Oceans. I mean, what a brain-bending album that is, that also has every dynamic, every nuance a drummer could possibly play, and on percussion and everything. So I very quickly became extremely fond of Alan's playing, huge Yes fan. Second concert I saw, is that right? Yeah, second concert I saw, not counting bands I opened for when I was on tour at 15. So I saw Led Zeppelin in 1977. Then at 15, I went on tour. I opened for Heart, Blue Oyster Cult,
Oh,
Steely,
wow.
Seals and Crofts, bunch of bands. But I didn't always see their concerts. But Yes was the second like real concert. Saw them sixth row in the round at the LA Forum, and that was the big venomous bite that got me. And I just saw Steve and I. Steve lives in SoCal. I live in the mountains in Arizona. He flew out here last week, and we saw John Anderson in Phoenix last Wednesday. He said my jaw was kept hitting the ground. He's going to be 80 in October, and he still sounds amazing. But going back to Alan, there's something about drummers that are, someone described it perfectly to me once. They said drummers are like the hockey players of music. And I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, drummers are looked at as like the cavemen of music. They're, brutes and beasts and wild men and all this, but you just like hockey players. But you talk to them, they're the nicest, most gentlemanly or womanly, women you'd meet. They're just so cordial. And I hope I can live up to that. I don't know about that. But Alan, one day, in fact, the day that picture was taken, went to his house. He ended up living, and my parents did not have money, believe me, but during the 80s, he lived around the corner from the house I grew up in. Friends told me about it, and I didn't believe them. They said, just drive by. It's this house across from our friend Mike. I drove by, and there he was outside mowing the lawn. I instinctively honked, and he waved. Went to my parents' house, told them about it, and I'd start to see him around town because I didn't live far from my parents. And then I said, screw it. I went to his house one day, introduced myself. But that day, after Alex was born, when I opened the door, he had on Speedos, a tank top, and a scuba tank. And I said, Alan, it's June. Halloween is in October in the US. I don't know what goes on. And he laughed. He said, no, my neighbor's having a problem with the drain in his pool. I'm going to go down and see if I can fix it for him.
Wow.
Like, that's the kind of guy he was, Just a tremendous, big-hearted man who was such a great musician, such a great drummer, one of the most well-rounded drummers I think ever. And when you think, if you watch the documentary about Imagine, there he is. He's like 18 or 19 years old playing the drums on Imagine with John Lennon. And it's just, it's really interesting. The career he had, and he's still just was such a nice, beautiful person, humble. But his drumming really spans a lot. Yes, went through a similar sort of stage as Genesis, getting more poppy. In fact, my son Steve and I just interviewed a gentleman who did this album, this book, all about this album, which changed the whole game for Yes. And they took a lot of flack for it, just like Genesis, but it was still, in my opinion, Yes. And they went through it, came through it the other side. The Trevor years, some people don't like it. We love it. And again, my point, Paul, is that it just showed that Alan is an everything drummer. Mm-hmm. He really is an everything drummer, just like Phil. And I know you're going to ask me what album, and it's like, this one might be the second hardest. I could say Yes songs. There's some three songs have Bill Bruford playing drums. They wanted to include Bill because he was with them but but that was also 1972 or 3 when he was 24 years old or 22, whatever. You certainly do it, but I'd say watch the video of the Full Circle tour. No, Songs from Tsongas, Tsongs, their 35th anniversary tour really encapsulates a lot. But so does the House of Yes at the House of Blues. It's really difficult.
It is, yeah.
And with so many epic long pieces, you've got Olive Tales from Topographic Oceans. His version of Playing Close to the Edge is amazing, and You and I in Siberian Katra of the same album. Then the album after that, when Rick left, they got Patrick Moraz, you've got Relayer. And the music on Sound Chaser is also insane. It's the most, in his words, the most adventurous music he's ever done from the standpoint of a rhythm section. Him and Chris Squire in Sound Chaser, The Gates of Delirium, A Hold Side Long, and even in the more simpler, I got bashed for using that term recently with the Beatles. Like, what? Anyway, the more simpler To Be Over on that same album, but throw a dart at that catalog, and if Alan's on it, you'll learn everything you need to know about his playing.
Absolutely. And thank you so much as well for the personal stories there, because they're fantastic and they do help to fill in the character and the color of the man as well. And
Yeah.
seeing him stood there in his Speedos with his air tank on is an interesting one. Let's move on to your first, what finishes #1 on your list of 5. And you said this was easily #1 for you, and you said the rest were more of a thought. So who could #1 be then, Dan?
It is John Henry Bonzo Bonham of Led Zeppelin. I was sprung on that as a 7-year-old kid when my 14-year-old cousin put on the first album and Good Times, Bad Times. I had already started playing drums. So if everybody knows Good Times, Bad Times with that magical single bass drum. And yes, I know he had 2 bass drums in the very beginning before they hit it, before the, he's using one pedal for that. It was like, what the F word is going on? Like physically, what's happening there? What is going on there? And I learned that very early on because it was so intriguing to me. And I didn't know that I wasn't supposed to be able to do it. So I did it. And going through their catalog as each album came up, growing up, I'm 61 and a half. So I was a young kid playing drums when each of these albums came out. And there isn't a song or an album that I say, man, that's kind of a throwaway, or I don't kind of, the music they made, and Robert and Jimmy, I don't remember if John Paul has said this, will say that it's because of John Bonham's drumming, his technique, his sound, his style. He's known as a basher. He's known as bombastic. Certainly he had that. But if you listen to songs like Since I've Been Loving You, T for One, if you listen to one of my favorite songs that is a sleeper is Down by the Seaside. And he's basically playing a shuffle in slow motion. And it's got that middle break. But then you put on Presence, there's not one acoustic song on there, one acoustic instrument. And it's just, man, Achilles' Last Stand. To see that live was jaw-dropping. It really was. The sound, the technique, the finesse that someone known to be bombastic could have, even the finesse in some of the bombastic playing. If you put on one of my absolute favorite songs ever, has no guitar solo, it's by Led Zeppelin, and to me it's one of my 2 top, where I'd say these 2 songs have the sexiest freaking groove. That is Out on the Tiles and the Wanton song. And his drumming is just amazing. It really is. The Craziness of Black Dog, thanks to John Paul Jones. He wrote that, and they were all like, wait, you want us to do what? Like, the timing was so weird. They almost threw it away because Bonham said, I can't do this. But they did it. They pulled it off. They pushed, they did it. So it's so sad what happened. You know, we have to remember that these larger than life figures, they're people too, and they come with stuff. And sometimes that stuff isn't all good. Sometimes that stuff includes personal struggles. I'm honored that Jeremy Colson, Steve Vai's drummer, is going to come on Drum Talk TV soon and talk about the recovery that he's in right now from alcohol and whatnot, because people, I think, can learn from that. But with John Bonham, he hated being away from home. He didn't want to continue touring. He didn't want to do that last album and tour. Peter Grant had a way of, I don't want to say manipulating, but was very convincing. John liked cars, if I remember right. I think he got a Maserati out of it, or so. Not that he couldn't afford it at the time. But my point is, he hated being away from home. And I just read a quote yesterday of Robert Plant saying him and John Bonham were best friends since they were 14. And when John was there for Robert, when Robert lost his son Carrick, which happened 2 weeks after I saw Led Zeppelin, he said at the same time, Bonzo was losing himself. And I don't know if anyone's heard the sad story of what happened the day of the night he died, but Robert picked him up, or he picked up Robert, and he was really upset and said, I don't want to play. Everyone's better than me. So think of what was going on at the time. There was New Steely Dan, Rush is happening. You know, there's a lot of other drummers that became really popular. And he said, I don't want to play drums anymore. You play drums, Robert, and I'll sing. You know, all this stuff. He was really having a bad day. And then they did all that. He did all that drinking, and we lost him. That man, they say you shouldn't have idols. And my mom and dad were definitely my idols, I'm happy to say. But John was a huge influence, you know. I mean, and it wasn't just the music. It was like, I grew up with the influence of my father loving cars, and whoa, John Bonham loves cars. Look at all these cars. And he raced cars, and he built a motocross track for his son and his friends on the farm. And I raced motocross when I was, there are all these things, you know. I didn't have some false thing like I'm just like him, but the day he passed away, I was in, what grade was I in? 10th grade, 11th grade? Wow, I lost that part. But 11th grade, and it was the first mid-morning break, and I came down to the parking lot where all the stoners and rock stars of the school hung out, and everyone was just looking at me. I had this weird look, and I'm thinking like, you know, is my pee-pee hanging out? Like, why is everyone looking at me so weird? And they said, did you hear what happened? And they told me, and I went home crying. And my mom said, why are you home and what's wrong? And I told her my parents actually wrote a note excusing me to take to the office the next day, saying a friend of the family died, because that's how, you know, they looked at it. But I don't mean to be a downer, but I'm trying to express, I guess, the immense amount of influence he had on me. And at the Drum Talk TV 10-year anniversary show in May of 2023, my old band, who I was with in high school, but the bass player was a year older than me. The other two guys were 5-6 years older than us. We had a keyboard player for a while, and that's when we played the ELP stuff I told you about and some other things. But when he left, we played almost just Led Zeppelin. So for the 10-year anniversary, we did 90 minutes of Led Zeppelin, and we learned stuff back then from the bootlegs and played it just like in the movie. And I have all of that as part of the documentary that's coming out. And I've released some songs. If you look up Dan Shinder, Wanton song, Dan Shinder, what else have we released? Good Times, Bad Times. The song remains the same. You'll see some of that. But I had a green sparkle kit with the 2 timpani drums for that show because as part of paying homage to our brand for the first 10 years, I don't know if I'd be a drummer without. I had started before I heard John Bonham, but that's what made me say I want to do this. And I wanted to be an oceanographer. Growing up, I wanted to be the next Jacques Cousteau. When my dad took me to see Led Zeppelin, that ruined everything. By the third song, I thought, oh, wait, so that could be a job? And got home the next day, got my parents together, and said, I don't want to be a scientist anymore. I don't want to be an oceanographer. My mom enthusiastically said, oh, what do you want to be? I said, I want to be a professional drummer like John Bonham. So we broke out the paddles and jolted her back to life. And she was a little upset at first, but to her credit, exactly 1 year later, she found an ad for an audition for what became my first paid gig touring the United States as a drummer at 15 years old. So just an incredible catalog of music that will never, I believe, will never fade away. People will know the name Led Zeppelin in 100 years the same way people know Brahms, Tchaikovsky, Mozart, and the Beatles, and there's probably a few others. I truly believe that, and look how many bands came out of what they did, emulating, like Geddy Lee with the high voices. There's a lot of different aspects. The amount of drummers that man influenced, I think, is more than any other drummer could claim. I truly believe that.
Absolutely. Dan, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you for this last hour or so. And I've loved hearing how passionate you are about not just the drummers, but the music and how it's influenced you and how your life has progressed thanks to your love of drumming and obviously the influence of your number one choice there, John Bonham. Just to run you through the number five again, Paul Palmer, we had Ian Pace, Phil Collins, Alan White, and of course, John Bonham. A
Oh,
fantastic
can I give
top
a few
five.
honorable mentions,
Of course,
please?
yes, go for it.
Okay. So, honorable mentions in no particular order. I have to mention Neil Peart. Of course, Neil Peart was an amazing drummer. Of course he was. The reason why he's not in my top five, he wasn't one of my top five biggest, earliest influences. I love playing Rush. Power Windows, I think, in my opinion, one of the hardest albums to play to as a drummer. And so Neil Peart, Barrymore Barlow of Jethro Tull, put on Bursting Out Live. That man, incredible drummer. Don Perry, also of Jethro Tull. And then we've got Bill Ward of Black Sabbath, Mitch Mitchell. But then there's some old school guys, Max Roach, Papa Joe Jones, of course, Louis Bellson, of course, Buddy Rich, Speedy Rufus Jones, Sonny Payne, Bill Bruford. Oh, good God. Bill Bruford. I hope Bill doesn't see this. Bill, absolutely, Bill Bruford. Those are just a few that, John Weathers of Gentle Giant, one of the grooviest, funkiest white drummers on the planet, along with Greg Errico from Sly and the Family Stone, of course, as well. There's so many, but those five are my top five because they truly influenced the beginning of my drumming and my musical interests. So thanks again, Paul. Love what you do. Thanks so much for having me. It's truly an honor. I appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. It's been great speaking to you, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.